Okay, well, so welcome everybody to the final session. This week we're going to be turning our gaze towards perception. We in this model we've been sort of playing with different ways of talking about this aspect. Sometimes we call it perception, sometimes we call it emptiness. In this session, I'm going to really preference the framing of perception more so, partly because I'm right now about to give now an 8-minute talk, and I don't feel like trying to explain emptiness in 8 minutes. That sounds like it will helplessly make errors that will lead you astray. So instead, I'm going to talk about perception. And in this aspect, we might say that what we're harmonizing or attempting to harmonize with is the true nature of perception, the nature of nature, as Shinzen says. And you might ask, what is the true nature of perception? Well, the true nature of perception is that things appear dependently on how we relate to them. Things do not, as they say in the Tibetan tradition, exist on their own side as some immutable, solid whole out there, independent from our way of looking. So it's very critical that we kind of start this aspect off by at least understanding conceptually that from the perspective of this training in perception, that we are not objective witnesses of experience, that we can sit over here and sort of actually see things as they are, as if they were objectively that way. But instead, we're being asked to see that, or trained to see that perception is fundamentally participatory. It's fundamentally participatory, that it depends on the way that we relate to it. The way things appear to us depends on how we look at them, how we relate to them, how we participate with them. And so in this aspect of perception training, one way of sort of holding it is that we're training to see exactly how plastic and malleable is perception. And we do that by trying out different ways of relating to our experience and noticing how it shifts, how it changes, how it unfolds differently. And so, this is something that we can begin to observe when we kind of put on this aspect in very gross and obvious ways, and it just gets more and more and more and more and more subtle. So, the example that I often use when I talk about this is, there's a tree outside the window behind my computer right now, and if you can see a tree, you can do this right now, but what is it like, and you can even just think through this, what is it like to see the tree as a source of resource to be extracted, like wood to build a house with, or to build a fire with, right? Can you relate to a tree like that, this tree in front of you, if you can see one? A resource to be extracted. Or could you put on a way of relating to this tree, whatever a tree is, as a mysterious, sacred being? Beautiful, unknowable, we cannot fathom it. Don't really know what it is. It's kind of an intelligence. And you notice, if you kind of play with that, can you see how the tree occurs to us differently when we put on those different ways of looking at it? And could you imagine perhaps different worlds, different cultures, different planetary operating systems that might evolve on top of those different ways of looking? And so, the way that we look at things, the way that we relate to our experience, to our perception, ends up being one of the most fundamental leverage points not just for our own transformation, our liberation, our relief of suffering, but also, in fact, for the liberation and transformation of the world. Yet these views, these ways of looking, end up running the world. Yeah, we now live in a civilization that tends to view the tree reduced to boards as being more valuable than the mysterious tree in the ground that we don't understand, that's a sacred, unknowable object. And that's a view, right? We actually can perceive the tree in both ways. And so this plasticity of perception is what we explore here. One facet of the study of perception is, and this is classically in Buddhism, what they primarily focus on is that in the way that we relate to our experience, moment to moment, we create suffering, we create problems, and that there are other ways of relating to our perception, our experience, that don't create problems, in which problems are nowhere to be found, in which suffering is released, and we find a sense of relief and deep peace. So now there's lots of ways we could talk about this, but in this class, we're going to look at two specific sort of facets of this training in perception. The first is what clinging feels like. So clinging is, if we observe our perception moment to moment, clinging is this sort of like, it's a kind of mental flavor that feels contracted, tight, clenched, narrow. As I describe this, maybe you can even sort of link this up to your own experience. We've all experienced clinging, and now we're going to try to like become more sensitive to its presence and understand what it does to our experience when clinging is present. So clinging, again, is contracted, tight. It has a kind of hardness to it, a kind of not okayness, and even a kind of desperation. Yes. Clinging sees scarcity. It sees threat. It tends to push away. I would say it tends to carry seeds of resentment and complaints. And in a very like fundamental way, we could say that clinging, it's implied in the word, grabs. It grabs experience. And it often seems to kind of hijack attention and debase our agency when clinging is around. And then, clinging is also just intrinsically unpleasant. It's a source of suffering. So see if you can kind of locate that in your experience, this sense of like clinging, what it is. You know it. And so partly, the Buddhist path is turning towards clinging, is like getting very versed in the movements, the taste, the all the expressions of clinging. So on the one hand, we're going to try to tune into and learn about what clinging is like. And then the other thing we want to do is learn about what the release of clinging is like. What's the release of clinging like? So you'll notice, and you might be able to notice this in your own experience in the past, is that the shift from clinging, this kind of grabbing on, this contraction of our awareness around a certain object, the shift from clinging to non-clinging involves a feeling of relief. I might say something unhooks, releases, expands. Your mind feels bigger, more open, more poised, more responsive, more free. And so underneath the emotional healing, the values discovery, the energetic contractions and releases, there is this clinging. There is this clinging of the mind. It is shot through all the other aspects. We can notice it in our awareness contracts. We can also notice it in our body. clinging manifests in the body as muscular tension. That's one of the ways it's reflected. When we kind of learn in this aspect how to relate to our experience, irregardless of the content of experience, irregardless of the content, what we're actually experiencing, in a way that reduces clinging, not only does it relieve our suffering in the moment, but it actually lubricates every other aspect. It allows us to more skillfully harmonize across every other aspect that we've been working with, because our emotional patterns don't get so stuck on the sense of self that we're clinging to, for instance. Yeah. And we could go into that, but I've already, I think, gone over time. So I'm going to stop the explanation there and instead move into a guided meditation, a 10-minute guided meditation. And for this guided meditation, I'm going to try to guide each one of the 3 characteristics that were part of the module that hopefully you read up on and maybe even did the guided meditation. And so part of what this training in perception affords is a certain quality of fluidity of modes of participating with our experience, right? And so because we're going to be switching between these ways of looking so quickly, you can actually get a sense, hopefully very directly, how they cause experience to be experienced differently, right? So when we shift between impermanence, we shift into this suffering characteristic, we shift into anatta, not self. Okay, that's enough talking. Let's practice.